Thanks so much to all my patrons. Join now to help support the channel and help pick the books I review on this channel. Link in the description. And I am done. Okay, so I just got done listening to Priest of Bones. This is book 1 of the War for the Rose Throne series by Peter McLean. And I want to give you my unedited thoughts upon finishing this book, which was literally just right now. So yeah, I did not like this one. This is a pretty easy 2 stars for me. Didn't hate it. Certainly hated some parts of it, but didn't hate the book as a whole. I found some things enjoyable about it, but yeah, overall, not a good experience. And I got pretty close to DNFing this book as I went along. And it's just very frustrating because I feel like I am predisposed to like this kind of book. This book, and we'll talk more about the plot in a little bit, but this is a mafia story, essentially. It's more of like just like a mafia story. The building of a mafia empire, or the rebuilding of one. And I like that kind of story, right? Like the Godfather series is well, the first 2 are 2 of my favorite movies of all time, if not like my 2 favorite movies of all time. Maybe there's more that I like up there, but it's very high up there. And, you know, I read the Greenbone saga within the past couple years, and all 3 of those books I gave 5 out of 5s, and I love that. That's another mafia story. And this is grimdark, and I love grimdark. And so you add these things together, and it feels like something that I would love. And as I got recommended this book, I got recommended this book by people who told me this is a good audiobook. As you may know from watching my channel, I'm always on the hunt for more audiobooks because my TBR for physical books is very long, but my TBR for audiobooks is quite short because I like to listen to audiobooks that are more like single POV or very limited in the amount of POVs that are easier to follow because I can get a little more distracted listening to audio than physical books. So I save the big chonkers for my physical books, and then I'm more selective, find a really good audiobook narrator with a easier plot to follow, and that's what I say for audiobooks. And that is true. This is what this is. The audiobook narrator is great. I don't know his name, but I recognize his voice. I don't know this for sure, but I'm about 95% sure that I recognize his voice from listening to The Pillars of the Earth. So I have these very positive memories of this voice, a voice that I love. And it is single POV. It's very easy to follow. So I'm glad that I did this on audiobook. And the audiobook was a pleasurable experience from that side of things. But the experience itself, I found so many things that I disliked about this book as I went along. And it's frustrating. And when I went on Goodreads, and when I was looking up this book a little bit, because normally I do a little bit more, you know, I know a little bit about the books before I read them based on recommendations or just hearing things out there. This one, somebody recommended it, and I looked up some basic things on Goodreads. Basically, the entire first page is 5 out of 5 stars, which is better than normal, better than what you would normally see from that kind of thing. People I know and kind of trust were all giving it 5 stars. And I was like, man, I have pretty high confidence this is going to be awesome. But man, like, what did I just read that you all read, or the ones that read this and loved it? Because honestly, I was bored for a lot of this book, and that's not a phrase that I want to say from a fantasy book. Even very slow books, like a lot of the Realm of the Elderlings, I would never call boring. I would just call them slow. Let's talk about the plot a little bit, because I can't talk about the problems I had without kind of going over things. Because the plot is a little bit more unique from what I'm used to and has an interesting premise to it. So you have this world where it almost feels like maybe like a little post-medieval, but kind of has that medieval kind of vibe to it. No, definitely after that. It somewhere between now and medieval. I'm not great in my longer-term history. I'm more of a modern history kind of guy. But you've got these characters. There's been a major war, and they've conscripted all the adults, or a lot of the adult men, to go fight in this war. Didn't matter what your rank was when you got drafted. So there's this town, and there's these mafia bosses, and basically all of the mafia bosses got sent to fight in this war, and they had to basically give up their mafia empire and all the businesses they were running. And this guy, this priest, he's come back, and the story starts out with them after the war coming back to the town, and him talking to his troops about saying, like, look, here's the deal. We're going back to this town, and we're basically going to start up my mafia empire again. Are you in? and almost everybody's in, and they go back and they have nothing, and they have to start building it up again, taking over the businesses again that they lost. And that's basically the plot of this book. There's some other side plots going on, but that's kind of the premise here. And that's an interesting premise to me. It's fun. I've read mafia books, I've watched mafia movies, but I've never watched one of the building phase. All the stuff that I've watched, everyone is established already. There's, this mafia boss, they have a whole organization, and we get to watch these major wars going on between them. They're very sophisticated. This was a build it from the ground up. And it felt like, I didn't watch the whole series, but it felt very Peaky Blinders. And even the vibe of it in the time period of it felt very Peaky Blinders-ish. And it feels like the author was very intentionally going for that. I won't say that he ripped off anything. I'm not an expert enough in Peaky Blinders to say that. Let's assume not. Let's not assume bad things from authors. Not everybody is 𝗟𝗏𝗏𝗏 with the first binding where he just rips off everything. In fact, very few are like that. He's in a class of his own, let's just say. This wouldn't be a Matt video if I didn't bring up that book, right? But yeah, this book just never delivered that punch that I wanted. This wouldn't be the worst thing to not deliver that major punch in a first book, especially. If the characters were engaging, which ultimately was my biggest problem here. So the story, like I mentioned, is told from a first-person perspective, from this crime boss, Thomas Piety. It's a little too clever to make a priest with his last name Piety, but whatever. So he's just this dark character, and he runs this crime boss family, not even like a family. He runs this crime empire that's very small. He's bleak, and I think the author was trying to lean into the thing that Mark Lawrence does. And I'm not saying he copies Mark Lawrence, but it reminded me a lot of what Mark Lawrence did in the Prince of Thorns and Broken Empire. In the Broken Empire trilogy was also similar, where you had this single POV, you had this very, very bad person. And I inherently don't enjoy these types of stories. I didn't like it when Mark Lawrence did it. I didn't like it when R.F. Kuang did it with Poppy War. And I most certainly didn't like it here. If you enjoy these single POV books with a very bad person that you follow from beginning to end, then you might love this. But knowing me, it is not Matt's cup of tea. But I do love dark books themselves. And honestly, for me, the darker the better. But for dark books that I love, I want to be shocked. I want to be horrified. And I want to feel very deep feelings that make me think on a deeper level. But here, it's just a bunch of bros doing bad stuff, and it didn't connect with me in any sort of enjoyable way or deeper way. It just felt very surface level. I also want my darker stories to ramp up that darkness and lull you in. Almost all of my favorite really dark books have that in common. They don't start out like that. 11th Cycle recently did that. Now, I know this isn't the greatest example because most of you haven't read that. It's not a very major book. But I will hype it up a little bit in saying that it nailed this tone perfectly. It started off and felt like, a normal, little village town, and as you've read a million fantasy books that start like this, but it progressively got darker and darker, and it ended up turning one of the darkest books that I've ever read in my life. That's a great way to go about these things in these darker books. Brian Lee Durfee's series did the same thing. Starts off very, casual, starts to ramp things up and gets darker and darker as it goes along. But this one, it has like a near rape on page 2, just to set the stage again, very much like the Broken Empire, which I think had a successful rape on page 1. So I guess this is, twice as slow as that book. But yeah, it lacks that depth, that I feel like I need in my stories. In first-person point of view, it can be wonderful. Normally I like multi-POV, but first-person point of view can be amazing because you can get this nice, deep understanding of the main character that you cannot get in multi-POV. But it only works if the character is compelling and interesting. And for me, this character felt like a bore and completely lacked any sort of positive traits to them, like a sense of humor, which normally helps with these bad characters. Think about the bad characters that you can instantly evoke in your, like the favorite bad characters you've ever known that you followed as a point of view. They normally have some sort of, dash to them. They have some sort of rogue in them. They have some sort of like fun or interesting or likable traits that balance out these bad traits. I'm thinking of people like Captain Kennett in Robin Hobb's Rubbing the Elderling series, in the second trilogy that she wrote. And, I'm thinking of characters like, 𝐒𝐻𝐷 in First Law, who had some comedic things going along with this horribly bad character. And there's a reason that both of those characters go down as people's favorite characters of all time when you do kind of rankings list. It's like it's trying to be The Godfather, except that The Godfather wouldn't be that interesting if the entire story was told from somebody really dry like Vito Corleone. And there's a reason they didn't do that. And they followed multiple characters because it would really suck if it was just that one character. There were a lot of elements going on here. I just couldn't connect with any of them. There's this gang warfare that was uninteresting to me. And I love a good fantasy gang book. But something was lacking here from the gang warfare thing. For one thing, the gang warfare here is about starting from the bottom and just slowly amassing to the former glory that this gang once had. And it would be far more interesting for me to read a book from them in their heyday, when we don't have to have this slow takeover that felt really samey as they take over businesses one at a time. Instead, the storyline can focus on the bigger picture and the politics between the gangs. But here it's severely lacking in that front. The main character just feels cookie cutter, and I really can't tell you much about him that makes him unique in literature, and that's not a good thing. Not a good thing at all. This is a fantasy book, and I feel like it could have leaned more into the fantasy elements, but this really did feel like Peaky Blinders with a little teeny bit of fantasy in it. There's one character that's got these kind of, something going on with him. I don't want to explain it because I do think a lot of people that watch this review will end up loving this book if they read it. And maybe you've heard things here that are like, yeah, Matt says he hates that, but that sounds really up my alley. I'm hoping that's the case. I always hope that in books that I trash, or almost always, unless you've copied your book like 𝗟𝗶𝗸 did. But yeah, it's I think that the story could have been improved had we got multiple POVs. I think it could have improved a lot. I think it could have improved if we didn't have that slow building period and we just kind of got to be into the action, kind of like Greenbone Saga did. And you didn't need to copy that. You could do your own thing. In fact, the setting is very different from Greenbone Saga and very different from The Godfather. And it could have been its own unique things right out of the gate. But I just feel like it missed the mark in that regard. But yeah, those are my thoughts. They did have a middle section that I thought I was starting to enjoy it. Once they got settled into the town after the intro, that I wasn't sure where the story was going because I didn't know it was a gang book when I read it. But as soon as that hook started going on, I was like, oh, this is a story about creating this gang. This is fun. I like what's going on here. So I had probably 100 pages or so, maybe a little bit more, maybe like a quarter of this book where I was like, this is good stuff. And then it just went downhill. So yeah, can't give it a 1 star, but it's closer to that than 3. So let's end it there. Hopefully you're hearing this and are like, oh, that sounds good, but maybe not. If not, avoid this one. There's other better stuff out there. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, happy reading to you. Thanks again to all of my patrons, with a special shout out to my Ascendant tier and Librarian tier patrons: Anna G, CJ, Doust, Darren, Gil, Gregory, JD, Jonathan, Nathan T, Nev's Book Channel, 𝗿𝗏𝗏𝐿, Ron Reich, Russell, Ryan L, Sydney Baker, Tay C, Tahir, Tommy, Zion, Anna, Andra, Blair, Brock, Evan, Joe UK, Kat Mick, Michael Sugarman, Philippe, Sky, and Wacky. Thanks for sticking to the end of this video, and if you want to watch some more content from my channel, click over here and I've got some good videos for you. Thanks so much.